Hello there, and welcome to the Sleepy Alchemist. Tonight, we journey into a world of whispered orders, forgotten ruins, and a voice that could melt even the coldest armor. Picture this: a medieval dusk, thick with wood smoke and damp moss. A lone rider crests a ridge, the red of sunset flickering off his greaves like distant firelight. Below him, what's left of a once sacred temple curls with lazy plumes of smoke, as though exhaling in dreams. Now, you probably want to know this up front. It's not about firepower or magic jewels or even heroism in the usual sense. It's about obsession, but not the loud, sweaty kind. The kind that creeps in through your ears and rewires everything. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, drop your location and local time in the comments. It's always cozy knowing where in the world we're drifting off from. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Caldus hated the way horses smelled after a long ride, sweat and leather and wet dirt, but he'd ridden farther in fouler weather and worse causes. His orders were sealed in wax, tucked inside a hide pouch lashed to his belt. Not that he needed to open them again. The command had been clear enough: locate the Flamekeeper, silence her. The message hadn't specified how. A blade across the throat, poison in stew, perhaps even a quietly staged accident. What mattered was the outcome. No more whispers in the wind, no more songs waking people from old griefs, no more fires that wouldn't die. Still, he hadn't expected the temple to even exist. But there it was, part stone, part charred wood, half sunk in ivy and moss. Not a fortress, more like a hearth forgotten by time. The kind of place bards might sing about but rarely visit. A lonely chimney trickled thin smoke into the dusky air. If the Flamekeeper was alive, she was in there, tending that impossible fire. Sliding off his horse with a grunt, Caldus adjusted the sword strapped across his back. He preferred the weight of an axe, but generals thought swords looked nobler. He trudged down the incline, boots squelching through soft earth, until he reached the threshold of the ruin. Inside, the air was warmer than it had any right to be, and there she was. Not dressed in robes, nor wearing a crown of cinders as rumor suggested. Just a woman with bare feet, soot-smeared cheeks, and dark hair pinned back with a twig. She stirred something in a clay pot over the fire, humming. The kind of hum that didn't stay in your ears but settled deeper, like the memory of a lullaby you never learned, but somehow missed. She didn't look up when she spoke. "If you're here to kill me, at least try the soup first." That stopped him. He blinked. "How did you?" "Because you smell like politics," she said, finally turning. "Also, I saw the bird that delivered your orders yesterday. Big one, red tail. Government likes its dramatic birds." She looked him over, calm as kindling. "Sit." He did, because something in her voice, something just under the obvious words, commanded more than obedience. It suggested familiarity, like she already knew him. Or at least the version of him he'd forgotten how to be. The fire between them cracked and popped. She offered him a crude wooden bowl filled with a thick, orange stew. The scent of lentils, garlic, and something vaguely sweet, perhaps fig, rose warmly. Caldus took a bite, more out of reflex than hunger. It was good, suspiciously good. She sat across from him, still humming, her hands folded like a patient teacher. "You're wondering why I'm still here," she said. "If the whole realm wants me gone, why I haven't run." He said nothing, chewing. "I haven't run," she continued, "because fire doesn't run, it waits." In medieval Europe, temples often stood on natural ley lines, where some believed the earth's magic bled close to the surface. The last Ember Temple had once been one of those places, burned during the Southern rebellions, then rebuilt, then burned again. Most thought it finally died 100 years ago. "Historians still argue," she said, tracing circles in ash with one finger, "whether this fire has been lit continuously since the first priestess in the Age of Clay. I say it has, because I never relit it." Caldus frowned. "You're telling me that's the same fire?" She smiled, teeth a little too white for someone supposedly isolated. "Flames have memory. Didn't you know that?" Actually, he hadn't, but there was something in the way she said it. Something unteachable, undeniable. He'd been trained to spot deceit, hesitation, misdirection. She offered none, just warmth, and that humming voice. "So, what now?" she asked gently. "Do you try the soup, listen to my story, and then murder me in my sleep? Or maybe," she tilted her head, "maybe you stay a night, let the fire tell you something, for a change." Culdus finished his bowl in silence. The room pulsed gently with the light of the hearth and the flicker of her eyes. He couldn't remember the last time he'd felt this quiet inside, or this curious. The floor beneath Culdus was warm, not scorched, not smouldering, just comfortably heated, like the stone itself remembered the fire above it and wanted to help. He sat with his back against one of the load-bearing beams, chewing slowly on a sliver of dried apple Alinia had offered after the soup. She moved with deliberate slowness, as if the temple's breath dictated her pace. Every step she took was unhurried, yet purposeful, like a pendulum at rest. Her voice still humming, faintly echoed in the open stone chamber as she wandered to the edge of a crumbled archway. "I know what they say about me," she said without looking back. "Witch, heretic, or my favorite, the ember who whispers kingdoms into collapse." She laughed softly. "If I could really do that, don't you think I'd have better curtains?" Culdus gave her a half smile, the closest he'd come to anything like humor since crossing into the woods. "They also say you speak to flames, that the fire only answers you." She looked over her shoulder. "No, no, not just me. It listens to anyone who actually says something worth hearing." That didn't clear anything up. She stepped outside, beckoning him with a flick of her wrist. He hesitated. His orders tightened in the pouch at his hip, but eventually followed. Outside, the air was crisper. The night had begun to pull its black shawl over the sky, and yet the wind here, around the ruined temple, felt different, like it bent slightly around the building in deference. Respect, maybe. She led him along a path of warm, moss-covered stones, worn by centuries of use. Fireflies floated lazily through the brush, like lanterns on a drowsy patrol. They reached a low wall, beyond which stretched the remnants of a garden, broken terracotta pots, overgrown rosemary bushes, and something that looked suspiciously like marigold pushing through the rubble. "Did you build all this?" he asked. "Hardly. It built itself. Fire calls what it wants. Sounds selective." She shrugged. "So is war." He flinched slightly at that. "Sorry," she added, not sounding sorry. They stood there in silence. Somewhere nearby, an owl hooted, followed by the faint rustle of something small, fleeing something larger. Alinia crouched and ran her fingers through the soil beside a fire-blackened statue, its face eroded, but the form unmistakably female. "You said the fire never went out," he said, "but this place fell, yes, more than once. Crusaders tried to drown it in oil. Then came frost priests with their ice runes. Then the plague. They said I caused that too." She looked up at him, half smiling. "You'd think I was really important, the way they keep blaming me for everything." "Maybe you are. I'm just a voice," she said simply. "The last one, maybe, but that's all I've ever been." In medieval times, there were such beliefs that certain priestesses or oracles could sing to natural forces, especially fire. The Pythia of Delphi in Greece inhaled fumes. Norse vulvas used chants to stir visions. Flamekeepers like Alinia were whispered of in regional epics, but rarely documented. "Historians still argue," she murmured, brushing moss from the statue's feet, "whether the voice moved the fire, or if it was the fire that gave the voice meaning." Culdus stared down at her. In the low light, her eyes seemed almost backlit, like coals beneath ash. "I've never heard anything like your voice before," he admitted. "It's not mine," she said. "Not entirely. I borrowed it." He didn't ask what that meant. Something about her tone made him think she wouldn't or couldn't explain. They made their way back to the temple in near silence. Culdus noted the cracks in the stone, the way certain parts of the roof had been propped up by salvaged timber. This place had been destroyed and rebuilt more times than he could count, and yet something eternal lingered here. Inside, the fire still burned, steady, not raging, not flickering, just being. Alinia offered him a rough wool blanket and pointed to a pile of thick hay-filled cushions near the hearth. "You can sleep there. If you snore, the fire will kick ash in your face." He smirked, I'll try not to. She sat cross-legged near the flames, facing away from him now. Her fingers moved slowly, tracing strange shapes into the ash at her feet. As he settled in, she began to sing. It wasn't a full song, more like a woven series of notes, low, mournful tones with occasional bursts of brightness, like a lullaby written for fire itself. And something in him cracked. He didn't cry. Soldiers didn't cry. But his chest tightened in a way it hadn't since his brother died at the siege of Marrowgate. And somehow, that distant battlefield, the screams, the smoke, all of it, felt a little less heavy. That voice. He didn't understand it, couldn't translate it. But it curled around his memories like ivy on stone. He didn't know how long he lay there, eyes open in the orange dark. But eventually, sleep took him, and the fire watched. Culdus woke to the scent of charred cinnamon and pine. The morning light filtered through gaps in the stone walls, fractured and golden, casting trembling shadows that danced like ghosts of the fire. For a moment he forgot where he was, expected a barracks, a comrade's snore, the clink of armor. Instead, he heard her voice, not singing, speaking, quietly, rhythmically, as though telling a story to the embers. The words weren't in any tongue he knew. The cadence rose and fell like waves, soothing and strange. Alinea sat where she had the night before, still facing the fire, lips barely moving. Culdus sat up slowly, the scratchy wool blanket slipping from his shoulders. His muscles ached, not from the ride, but from the absence of his armor. He realized it was still strapped neatly by the wall, untouched, as if she'd respected the shell without needing to touch the night inside. "You're awake," she said without turning. "Did the fire let you dream?" "I don't usually remember them," he muttered. "But, yes." She finally looked back, one eyebrow arched. "And there was a boy," he said slowly. "Not me, but maybe, running barefoot through snow that didn't melt, and someone calling his name. A woman, I think," the voice sounded. He paused. "Like yours," he finished. She didn't look surprised. "It borrows what it needs. You said that last night. I say a lot of things. Only a few are remembered." He stood, stretched, winced. "So what was that language you were speaking just now?" "Fire tongue, right." He scratched his chin. "Totally normal morning small talk." She grinned. "You asked." In medieval folklore, fire was believed to have its own language, one that could only be understood through feeling rather than sound. Some monasteries even documented voice-blessed individuals said to murmur to candle flames, receiving visions in return. Most were labeled mad, and the fire responds, if it chooses to, not always in words, sometimes in flickers, sometimes in memory. Sometimes, she trailed off, watching the fire. Sometimes it just listens, and that's enough. He approached slowly, eyeing the flame like it might lash out. "So if I say something, it'll answer. Try." He cleared his throat, knelt by the hearth and mumbled, "Hello." The fire popped, sending up a lazy spark. Alinea chuckled. "It's shy." He glared sideways. "So it doesn't work for me." "It doesn't work on command," she said, standing. "It listens to what matters, and it hates lies." Culdus opened his mouth to argue, but paused, because deep down he knew. The fire hadn't flickered at his greeting, not because it didn't hear, but because he didn't mean it. He looked up at her. "Has anyone ever tried to steal it?" "Many." She walked to a nearby shelf of cracked jars and bone-handled tools. Some brought buckets. Others brought spells. One fellow even tried to seduce it. Ended up with singed eyebrows and a broken ego. "And you stayed through all that?" She shrugged, pouring crushed herbs into a cloth satchel. "It's not about staying, it's about being." He frowned. "That's vague. That's religion." "Fair enough." She handed him a mug of something steaming. It smelled like tea, but sharper, like the forest floor after rain. He sipped, expecting bitterness. Instead, it tasted like memory, like something he hadn't thought of in years. Plum wine, maybe, or the scent of his mother's kitchen after a thunderstorm. "What is this?" She gave a small, knowing smile. "The fire knows." His fingers tightened around the mug. It was then he noticed something etched into the hearthstone, partially obscured by ash. A symbol, a spiral with 3 arms, like flame curls twisting into each other. Ancient, familiar, he brushed at it with his hand. "I've seen this before," he murmured, "on a banner, years ago. During the siege at Rivenwall, one of the enemy mages wore it." She nodded slowly. "That wasn't a mage. That was a guardian." "A guardian of what?" "Of the voice," she said softly. "There used to be many of us. Some spoke, some sang, some simply kept the silence. But all carried the fire forward. That siege was our last great stand." He remembered the battle, or rather, he remembered how fast it ended. A flash of light, a sound like bells breaking, then silence. "They'd said the fortress burned from the inside out. They told us she'd summoned something unnatural. She didn't," Alinia said. "She became something natural, a voice too loud for lies." Caldus didn't speak. He realized then that the symbol, the spiral, was branded into her upper arm, faint but visible now, that her sleeve had slipped down. Not ink, scar. "Did they do that to you?" he asked. She looked at the mark, then back at him. "No, I asked for it." There was no pity in her voice, no pain, just acceptance. In Norse mythology, the rune Kenaz, shaped like an open flame, represented knowledge through fire. Some scholars believe flamekeeper orders across Europe adopted similar symbols, mixing spiritual devotion with ritual branding to show commitment to truth, no matter the burn. Historians still argue, Alinia added, gently reclaiming her mug, whether the flamekeepers were prophets or just lunatics with poetic timing. Caldus chuckled, more to break the tension than anything. "You don't seem insane. Give it time." She turned back to the hearth, whispering something under her breath. The flame flared, just for a moment, and for that single instant, he swore it sang back. Caldus hadn't meant to stay another night. That morning, while Alinia whispered to flames and stirred powders into tinctures, he'd tried, really tried, to remind himself of his mission. The wax-sealed order remained tucked inside his belt pouch, untouched but ever present. Kill her, remove the voice, ensure the fire would no longer speak to anyone. And yet, he found himself cutting more wood for her instead. Not because she asked. In fact, she hadn't. She merely mentioned in passing that the wind had shifted west, and that west winds usually meant 3 cold nights. So he fetched the axe. Every swing echoed louder than he liked. He glanced back once to find Alinia leaning against the doorframe, arms crossed, expression unreadable. "You chop like someone trying to avoid thinking," she called. He wiped his brow. "Isn't that the point of chores? You could just sit. Fire would talk anyway." "I like axes," she shrugged. "Axes like you." He paused mid-swing, blades sunk into bark. "That's supposed to be a compliment." She didn't answer. Instead, she vanished back inside, humming that same melody, the one that had wormed its way into his spine the night before. He hadn't realized how badly he wanted to hear it again, until she started. By dusk, he was still there. They ate together again, this time sharing goat cheese, thick bread, and figs. She told him stories, some clearly nonsense, others too specific not to be real, like the one about a flamekeeper who had hidden her voice inside a tree so her enemies couldn't silence her. Years later, a blind woodcutter carved a flute from that very tree, and when he played it, the tree's voice returned, burning down an entire city. Caldus listened, half laughing, half believing. "Do you always tell stories?" he asked. "Only when I feel heard." That gave him pause. "And do you?" Alinia looked at him over the fire, face flickering with warm shadows. "I think you're trying to." "That's enough for now." He slept near the hearth again, this time without the armor on. It sat in the corner, gathering dust and silence. The fire pulsed gently beside him. Alinia's voice still echoed in his ears, even though she hadn't spoken in hours. But his dreams burned. He saw a battlefield again, but not one he remembered. The sky was red, not with sunset but with smoke. Voices screamed in flame tongue, a language he shouldn't understand but suddenly did. Figures made of soot and song moved among fallen knights, and a woman stood at the center of it all, glowing with the light of the hearth. It was Alinia, and not. She was taller, older, her voice splitting the sky, but the eyes were the same, and when she turned toward him, her mouth formed a single word. "Stay." He woke gasping, Alinea was gone. The fire was still lit, barely, a few glowing coals nestled in their ashy cradle. Outside, the stars were still pinned to the heavens, but the moon had dipped low, throwing silvery shadows through the cracks in the stone. He rose, barefoot, sword in hand out of habit, and stepped outside. She stood at the edge of the clearing, singing, not loudly, but with a resonance that carried. Her voice wasn't for him this time. It was for the trees, the wind, the remnants of a world that no longer listened. And still, the world listened. Now, leaves turned in the wind. The grass swayed in rhythm. Even the stars seemed to hold their breath. When she finished, the silence that followed was almost painful. She didn't turn around. "I thought you might leave. I almost did." She smiled, barely. "The fire doesn't let go easily." "You dream of cities burning," he said, stepping closer. "Do you?" She nodded. "Sometimes I set them, sometimes I mourn them." Caldus clenched his jaw. "You know what I was sent to do?" "Yes." "You're not scared." She turned now. Her face was serene, but her eyes glowed with a tired fire. "Fear is for those who still expect fairness. You expect to die. I expect to matter. That's different." He didn't move. "I could kill you," he said. "You could," she agreed. "Or you could listen." He looked down at the sword. It felt awkward, not heavy, exactly, just unnecessary, like bringing a spear to a lullaby. "Why me?" he asked finally. "Why this voice? Why now?" She walked past him, back toward the ruin, and didn't answer until they were once again within the glow of the hearth. "The fire chooses its messengers," she said, "not for their bravery, not even for their loyalty, but for their ache. You carry too many ghosts, Caldus, that's why it heard you." He stared into the flame. "I'm a soldier, I've done terrible things." "Then you're perfect," she whispered. "Only the broken ever really listen." In 12th century Europe, there existed clandestine orders, half myth, half document, of silent pilgrims, veterans of war, who had renounced swords to carry fragments of old languages, walking from town to town, humming truths into alleyways. Many were illiterate, most were hunted, but some say their voices changed weather. Historians still argue, Alinea murmured, curling by the fire again, whether those men were prophets, or simply men who could no longer scream. He sat beside her. He didn't know what he believed anymore, but he knew this. Her voice didn't promise power, it promised remembrance, and he burned for it. The third evening came cloaked in the slow hush of a world that had forgotten how to rush. The fire burned low, not lazy but content. Outside, the sky bruised into navy and then into indigo, that moment right before true night when the world feels briefly holy. They shared a simple supper, barley stew thickened with root vegetables that Alinea had bartered for from passing traders weeks ago, and small rounds of crisp bread still warm from a stone hearth oven. Caldus hadn't noticed until today. "This tastes like autumn," he said between bites. "It was meant to," she replied. "Fire has seasons too." He gave her a look. "Does everything here talk in riddles?" She pointed her spoon at him. "Only the honest parts." They ate in silence after that, a quiet not born of awkwardness but of comfort. Caldus found that strange. Most silences in his life had been threats or regrets. This one felt like shelter. As they finished, she poured him a cup of something dark, too dark to be wine, and too smooth to be ale. "What's this?" "Night root tea." "That sounds safe." She smiled, only mildly prophetic. "You'll dream well." He sniffed the brew. It smelled of smoke and rain-soaked bark. He sipped. It was like swallowing the last note of a harp. He didn't ask what was in it. Alinea sat cross-legged near the fire, cradling her own cup. "Do you want to know how I became this? A flamekeeper?" She nodded. He settled down on the stone floor beside her, stretching out one leg. "Tell me." She took a slow breath, watching the fire like it would correct her if she lied. "I wasn't chosen because I was special," she said. "That's what people think. They imagine a child with glowing hands or a baby who cried flames instead of tears, but it was quieter than that." She traced a circle in the soot beside her. "I was just a girl who listened. I heard stories the wind wasn't telling out loud. I repeated songs I'd never been taught. My mother, God's rest her patience, thought I was mad." Caldus watched her draw symbols in the ash. spirals, eyes, what might have been runes. Then one day, during a storm, I sang a lullaby to calm myself. A song I'd never heard before. The fire in our hearth flared, just once. But it scared my uncle enough to tell the elders. She paused to sip her tea. They came that night, hooded, quiet, took me away like I was a gift and a threat. Were you afraid? She shook her head. I should have been, but I wasn't. The temple was cold at first. Not the fire, just the people. Most flamekeepers didn't talk. They sang, or they listened, but we weren't allowed to speak freely. Words had weight, especially ours. In medieval convents, particularly among certain Cistercian orders, silence was ritual. Speech was rationed, sometimes replaced by gestures. Some abbeys believed in preserving the purity of words. Saying too much dulled their power. Flamekeeper temples, if real, likely followed similar creeds. They taught us how to chant fire into life, she said, how to whisper to cinders, and how to scream without sound. It was beautiful and terrifying. And now you're the last one, he said. Her expression didn't shift. The others burned. He blinked. In a war, in a betrayal, a long pause. The Empire decided voices like ours were too dangerous, she continued. They didn't want people listening to anything that didn't come from a throne, so they sent soldiers. She looked at him, eyes soft. Men like you. He felt the words like a slap. Did you fight back? We sang. That doesn't seem like much of a defense. You've never heard a fire lament, she said quietly. It doesn't kill with flame. It kills with memory. He looked into the fire then, as if trying to imagine it. She added, one soldier dropped his sword and ran screaming, said he saw the faces of everyone he'd ever betrayed. Another just wept until his armor rusted around him. Keldas didn't know what to say to that, so he said nothing. Instead, he glanced at her hands, scarred, calloused, delicate, despite their strength. Not the hands of a warrior, the hands of someone who carried something heavier than steel. Why the stew? He asked suddenly. She blinked. What? Your first night, you said. At least try the soup before you kill me. Why start with a meal? She leaned back against a cracked pillar. Because you can't lie while eating soup. That's not true. It is, she insisted. You ever try to stab someone while chewing barley? He couldn't help it. He laughed, and so did she. They sat like that a while longer, fire warming their toes, the last of the tea cooling between them. You know, she said softly, you're not staying because you forgot your mission. He looked at her sharply. You're staying, she said, because you heard me. He couldn't argue, because he had. In the quiet that followed, Alinia began to hum again, the same melody, always changing, each time it found a new shape in his chest. That night, Keldas dreamed of a city made entirely of fire, alive, breathing, burning, and singing in a voice he could not forget. And when he awoke the next morning, his sealed orders still untouched at his side, he didn't even think about opening them. The fourth day began with rain, not the violent kind, just a lazy, persistent drizzle that softened the edges of everything. Water pooled in the mossy crevices of the old stones, trickling down like quiet tears. Smoke from the fire rose slower, trailing a lazy spiral through the holes in the crumbling roof. Keldas sat on the temple's stoop, chewing a bit of dried pear, watching the forest mist roll in like breath from a sleeping beast. His sword lay beside him, untouched, not buried, not cast away, just resting, like him. Inside, Alinia was grinding something. He could hear the rasp of stone on stone, the occasional rattle of clay pots, and the low hum of that melody again, threading through the soundscape like a heartbeat. When she finally emerged, apron dusted with powder, she nodded toward the fire. Come, she said. It's time. Time for what? For stories. Yours. He followed her without question, settling beside her on the warm floor near the hearth. The fire had been stoked fresh. It crackled brighter today, more awake somehow. Alinia gestured to the flame, then to him. Tell it. He blinked. Tell what? Who you were before the sword, before the orders, before the mission. He stared at her, then at the flame, then at his own hands, calloused, nicked, older than they should have been. There's not much to tell. There's always much, she said, but most men are afraid of the sound their own story makes when told aloud. Kaldus hesitated, then exhaled. My name is Kaldus Ashmere, third son, not important enough to inherit, not wild enough to exile. My father gave me a sword at 9 and said, if you're lucky, you'll die in glory. If not, you'll retire with back pain. Alanya smirked. Nice family motto. I joined the guard at 15, saw my first battle at 16, didn't eat for 2 days after. He stared into the fire. But then, it got easier. She nodded. Riven Wall, Red Moor, the Frostblood campaign. I stopped remembering faces, just weapons, formations. How long the screams lasted. I told myself it was duty, that we were keeping peace. But peace never stays still, Alanya murmured. No, he agreed. And the longer I fought, the more it felt like we weren't defending anything, just circling flames that someone else started. He rubbed his temples, and then one day, I was called to the general's tent. He handed me that letter, told me about a rogue flamekeeper in the north, a temple still lit, and said, silence it before someone listens. She didn't flinch, and you came to do it. I came to end something, but something ended in you instead, she said. He looked at her then, really looked, and realized this woman wasn't a mystery. She wasn't magic. She was history, wrapped in breath. She carried stories like scars and used her voice like a torch. And he had burned for that voice, before he even knew why. Do you regret it? She asked. The battles. Some. Which ones? He took a deep breath. The ones where I didn't feel anything. She stirred the embers with a carved iron rod, coaxing them back into flame. Then you're lucky. Most don't even remember enough to regret. In the ancient world, warriors returning from war often underwent purification rites before they were allowed back into their homes. In Rome, some were bathed in smoke. In parts of Gaul, they spent a week in silence, burning herbs and speaking to no one, lest the spirits of war follow them. Historians still argue, Alanya said softly, whether those rites were for the warrior or for the village. Kaldus smiled faintly. Maybe both. She stood and walked to a shelf lined with jars and scraps of old parchment. From between 2 brittle scrolls, she pulled a wrapped bundle, tied with fire-twined thread. She brought it to him and unwrapped it slowly. Inside were charred fragments of what once had been letters. I saved these, she said, from the last flamekeeper before me. She wrote every day, to no one, just in case someone ever asked what we died for. Kaldus picked up a brittle piece, reading the half-scrawled sentence, we do not keep fire because it is warm. We keep it because it remembers. He looked at her. Why show me this? Because I don't want you to just hear the fire. I want you to understand what it carries. And if I don't, she shrugged, then maybe you're just another soldier waiting for rust. That stung, but not unfairly. Later, they sat outside again. The rain had stopped, but droplets clung to the leaves like melted pearls. The world smelled of moss and wet stone. Alanya leaned back against a fallen pillar, eyes half closed. Why do you stay? He asked her. Really? She opened one eye. Because if I don't, no one will. That's a heavy burden. I was trained for it. I was trained to kill what you are, and yet here you are, because I can't stop hearing it. She looked at him. The voice, he shook his head. The truth beneath it. That night, Kaldus dreamed again, but this time, the fire didn't watch from the hearth. It walked with him. He stood barefoot in a corridor of smoke and stone, 100 torches flickering without heat. The ground beneath his feet was smooth, polished like obsidian. Along the walls were murals, painted in ash, dancing with movement he couldn't explain. Every image shimmered with life. Women singing over cradles of flame, children lighting candles with whispers, soldiers weeping into fires they couldn't extinguish, and all of them shared one face. Hers, Alanya, in 1,000 forms. A priestess, a prisoner, a bride, a spark. He passed each mural slowly, until the corridor opened into a great chamber of light. Fire roared from the ceiling, twisting like a serpent. But instead of fear, Kaldus felt recognition. Then, a voice echoed, not spoken aloud, but inside him. Not all things that burn are meant to be put out. He awoke before dawn, the fire still glowing gently beside him. Alenia wasn't there. Calder stood, his feet finding the cool stone with practiced ease. He didn't call out. It felt wrong to break the silence. Instead, he followed the trail she always seemed to leave. Bits of ash, crushed herbs, a half-folded blanket. He found her beyond the archway, sitting in a hollow tree stump like a throne. She faced away from him, shoulders relaxed, hair unbound and falling in waves. "You dreamt again," she said, before he could speak. "Yes. And the fire walked with you. How do you know?" "I asked it to." He approached slowly. "You can do that." "I can ask," she said. "It doesn't always listen, but it's fond of you." He sat beside her on the damp earth. "Why?" "Because you stopped speaking and started hearing." There was a long pause, broken only by the gentle hum of forest life. Somewhere, water trickled. A breeze whispered. "I need to tell you something," Calder said, reaching into his belt pouch. He pulled out the sealed letter, its wax still intact. "I never opened it." "I know." "You do?" She looked sideways at him. "The moment you didn't kill me, I knew." He turned the letter over in his hands. "What if I opened it now? You already know what it says." He stared down at the seal, a serpent wrapped in flame, the general's personal sigil. He'd seen it burned into the chests of deserters, etched onto execution orders. "I was supposed to silence you. Instead," she said, "you listened." He let the letter fall into the damp leaves. The fire didn't blaze in protest. It didn't scold. It simply glowed on in the distance, as if it too had waited for this moment. "There was someone," he said quietly. "Before all this." Alenia turned her gaze toward him, gently curious. "She was a healer," he said. "Fell in love with me after I took an arrow saving her brother. We used to write each other letters in the language of flowers. I didn't even know that was a thing before her." Alenia smiled faintly. "It is. Foxglove means regret. She died during the plague. Not from it. She was burned as a witch by the town she was trying to save. They said her cures were unnatural. And were they? They worked," Calder said. "Isn't that what matters?" She nodded. "I couldn't save her, and when I saw the crowd cheering, I joined the army the next day. To punish them? To punish someone. Anyone." Silence. Then Alenia reached into her cloak and pulled out a small bundle wrapped in linen. She opened it gently, revealing several dried petals, carefully arranged. "Each keeper carries a memory offering," she said, "to those whose voices were stolen." She handed him a single petal, blue, soft even in death. "Forget me not," she whispered. "It means you are not lost." He held it like it might shatter. "I'll keep it," he said. "No," she replied. "It keeps you." Back at the fire the world felt different. Not louder, just closer, like a great silence had stepped aside and allowed the truth in. Alenia began humming again, this time a lower, richer tone, not melancholy, steady, earthy, like soil breathing after rain. Calder sat with his back to the fire, eyes closed, and listened. "Do you know what I envy about your kind?" she asked. "My kind. Men of war. You are given orders. You carry them out. That's the full shape of your duty." He frowned. "That's not noble. It's simple," she said. "We flame keepers, we don't get orders. We get burdens. And we carry them forever, whether the world listens or not." He shifted closer. "But you keep going." She nodded. "Because fire doesn't die. It just changes what it burns." In 13th century French superstition, people believed the flame in a hearth was a spirit, and to let it die was to invite ghosts into your home. Some even left milk or bread by the hearth as offerings to keep it fed. The flame was never merely fuel, it was guardian. Historians still argue, Alenia added softly, whether this was just metaphor or if they truly feared the silence. Caldas thought about all the nights he'd spent staring into campfires, the way men grew quiet around them, stories shared only in whispers. He understood now. "Do you ever wish it were different?" he asked. "No," she said, "but sometimes I wish someone else heard what I hear." He looked at her, really looked, tired lines hidden behind fierce wisdom, a softness under the soot, a steadiness that had nothing to do with magic. "I hear you," he said, Alinea smiled, small and true. Then stay one more night. That night, the fire wasn't the only thing speaking. Alinea's humming had quieted, replaced by a low chant, barely louder than breath. She sat cross-legged near the hearth again, a bowl of crushed herbs resting in her lap, her eyes half-lidded. The rhythm of her voice seemed to sync with the flicker of flame, as if the fire breathed in time with her syllables. Caldus lay nearby, but not asleep, not even drowsy, just still. It was the first time he'd been truly still in years. "Tell me something," he said, staring up at the cracked ceiling. Alinea's voice didn't stop, but she tilted her head slightly, acknowledging him. "How does it work?" he asked. "The fire tongue." At that, her voice faded out, gently, like the tapering end of a lullaby. "You want to learn?" she asked. "I think I need to." She studied him. "It's not taught, it's remembered. That's the second time you've said that. What does it mean?" She shifted, moving to sit beside him, close enough that her shoulder brushed his. "Words have heat," she began. "Some are warm, safe, domestic. Some are hot, passionate, dangerous. And some are scalding. They crack stone, warp metal, burn truths into ash. And these fire words, they're in a different language?" "Yes and no," she said. "The flame reacts to intention, not grammar, but the shape of the sound matters. How it moves through you. A false word leaves no heat. A true one," she held up her palm, "leaves a mark." She rolled back her sleeve. There, etched just beneath the symbol of the flame spiral, was a thinner, newer scar, shaped like a character, or maybe a sound. "This was my first fire word," she said. "I spoke it by accident. Nearly burned the temple roof down." Caldus traced the air above the scar, careful not to touch it. "What does it mean?" "It means home." In some ancient cultures, particularly in Central Eurasia, words weren't just spoken, they were shaped. Certain tribal shamans believed that vocal tones could physically affect the world, and that saying the right word in the wrong way could either bless or curse a person. The power wasn't in the language, but in how the speaker carried it. Historians still argue, Alinea said, her voice low and melodic again, whether fire tongue was ever real, or if it was just a poetic way to explain charisma. "But tell me, have you ever heard a speech that made you weep? A voice that stirred something you didn't know you missed?" Caldus nodded. "Yours," she smiled. "Then you already understand the first rule." He turned toward her. "Teach me the next one." She didn't answer with words. Instead, she reached behind her and pulled a thin strip of parchment from a carved wooden box. On it, drawn in soot and wax, was a single symbol, a small curved mark shaped like a flame leaning in the wind. "This is the sound of memory," she said. "Close your eyes." He did. "Now breathe it. Not like a soldier, like a listener." He exhaled slowly, let the world fall quiet. "Now," she whispered, "say Valnath." He repeated it. Clumsy, flat. She shook her head. Again, with the ache behind it. He tried again. This time, his chest tightened. The word felt like it left a part of him behind as it passed through his lips. The fire flared, not dramatically, just enough to notice. A single tongue of flame tilted toward him, then back. He opened his eyes. Alinea was watching him, not surprised, but softened. "You felt it," she said. "I don't know what I felt," he admitted. "You remembered something. That's all it needs." He looked down at his hands. They trembled faintly. "I saw a door," he murmured, "in the dream. A big one, with a seal. I didn't know what it meant." "Now you do," she said. He looked back at her. "I can't go back." "No," she said. "You never really could." They sat in silence, the fire between them now more like a companion than a tool. It cast soft orange circles onto the stone floor, onto the bowls of herbs, onto their shadows curled close and flickering gently in tandem. "I don't want to be a weapon anymore," he said. "Then don't," she replied. "Be a voice instead." "Will they let me?" She shrugged. When has fire ever asked permission? That night, as he drifted to sleep beside the hearth, Caldus mumbled fire-tongue phrases under his breath, half-formed, uncertain. The fire pulsed each time, gently, encouragingly. He dreamt of voices, hundreds, all speaking different words but all part of the same song, and through them all was hers. Alinea's voice carrying the melody that had followed him since that first night. He didn't understand it. He didn't need to. It carried him anyway. The morning after his first fire word, Coldus awoke with a strange ache, not pain, exactly, but the kind of soreness one felt after using a muscle that hadn't been stretched in years. His voice, when he muttered a groggy greeting, felt hoarse, as if something inside him had been shaken loose. The fire still burned low beside him, warm but quiet, and Alinia was gone, again, not vanished, not hidden, just not there. She did this sometimes, disappeared for hours, returning without apology, often covered in dirt or ash or herbs he couldn't identify. But this morning he found her sooner than usual. She was in the stone garden behind the temple, standing in the drizzle, arms outstretched as if embracing the mist. A cracked bowl sat on a stone in front of her, filled with dark water. As he approached, she didn't move. "Morning," he said softly. She turned slightly, smiling. "Did you keep your word safe?" He frowned. "You mean the one I spoke?" "No," she said. "The one you heard." He didn't answer. She turned back to the bowl. "Do you know what this is?" "An offering. A mirror." He stepped beside her and looked into the bowl. At first it was just water, clouded, rippling slightly in the breeze. But then it steadied, and what he saw wasn't his own reflection. It was her, Alinia, sitting by the fire, much younger, her hair shorter, her eyes frightened. She spoke her first word here, Alinia said softly. She was 10. They told her not to, but she did. Coldus felt a chill. "You," she nodded. "The fire let me see myself. Not how I was, but how I sounded, and I sounded afraid." "Did it punish you?" "No," she said. "It listened, and then it waited. For me to listen too." He watched the image ripple away. "You said the fire has memory," he murmured. "Does that mean it remembers everyone who's been near it?" "Yes," she said, "but only the parts of them that spoke true, and the rest, lost." They walked the garden together, weaving between crumbling statues and half-buried paths. She showed him the markings left behind by other keepers, carvings into bark, pressed clay tablets tucked into roots, small flame char symbols etched into the backs of rocks. "These are memory caches," she explained. "Not words. Not quite. More like echoes." She pressed one of the tablets into his hand. "Say what you feel. The fire will keep it." He hesitated, then whispered, "I wasn't meant to be this." The tablet warmed in his palm. "Just for a second." "That," she said, "is how you start." Back inside, Alinia gathered parchments and scrolls and laid them in a wide circle around the hearth. She sat in the center, legs folded, hands resting on her knees. "You're going to read them," she said. Coldus blinked. "I can't read half these symbols." "You don't have to," she replied. "You'll listen." He sat, skeptical but obedient. The fire crackled, brighter now, licking the air with a curious energy. She began, not reading aloud, but translating in that musical cadence of hers. The words weren't quite modern, nor entirely foreign. Some rhymed, some chanted, some lilted, like lullabies, and fell apart mid-sentence. But the sound dug under his skin. One passage stirred something specific, a phrase that hit his bones like a remembered wound. "The flame does not ask who you were, only what remains of you when silence falls." He shut his eyes. He saw again the battlefield at Redmore, the screaming children, the broken cart, the woman who clutched her son and shouted for mercy as Coldus passed her by. He told himself she was already lost, that his blade couldn't save everyone. But now, the fire made him remember what he didn't want to see. He opened his eyes. The scroll had changed. Or maybe it hadn't. "What was that passage from?" he asked. She looked at him. "That wasn't from the scroll." He blinked. "Then what?" "That was you," she said gently. "The fire showed your echo." He sat back, stunned. In some medieval texts, often dismissed as apocryphal, there are references to listening stones or prayer fires that could reflect not the future or past, but the deepest part of a person's memory. Some accounts say these devices were used in trials or penance rituals. Most scholars consider them metaphor. Historians still argue, Alinia whispered, whether fire was meant to warn, or witness. He looked at her. "Why me?" She studied him for a long moment. Then, "Because you were sent to kill a voice, and instead you gave one back to yourself." Kaldus didn't answer. But that night, as he lay near the fire, he reached into the small bundle of dried petals she had given him earlier, and he whispered her name to the flame. Not with power, with feeling. The fire leaned toward him, just barely. He closed his eyes, and for the first time since taking up the sword, he slept without armor in his dreams. The falcon came at dawn. Its cry was sharp, slicing through the mist like a blade. Kaldus heard it before he saw it, an unnatural sound in this quiet world of moss, mist, and whispered fire. He stepped outside just in time to see the bird circle once above the treetops, then descend in a perfect spiral toward the clearing. Its feathers shimmered bronze in the rising sun. A crimson ribbon trailed from its left leg. Official, urgent, damn. The bird landed on a broken stone pillar, talons clicking with authority. It eyed Kaldus with the practiced contempt of a creature used to outranking humans. Then it extended its leg. Kaldus hesitated. Alinea emerged from behind him, barefoot, arms crossed, her face unreadable. "Looks like someone remembered you," she said. He took the scroll and snapped the seal. Same emblem as before, the serpent in flame, but this time the wax was cracked before he even touched it. Inside, the message was brief. "You are compromised. The Flamekeeper must be extinguished. If not by your hand, by another's. You have one more cycle of moonlight. Prove loyalty, or be considered lost." He exhaled, long, slow, folded the parchment with deliberate fingers. Alinea already knew. He could feel it, the way her shoulders had stiffened, the way the fire inside the temple had grown quieter, as though it too had read the message and was holding its breath. "They've given you a deadline," she said. "They think I'm faltering." "Are you?" Kaldus looked at her. "Do you want the lie or the truth?" She held his gaze. "Only the parts that burn." He didn't answer. He couldn't. Not yet. They spent the morning apart. He cleaned his armor, not to wear it, but to touch it. To remember who he was before all this began. The metal was cold, unfeeling. Every piece whispered stories of men who'd once worn it. Some dead, some forgotten, all obedient. He hated how natural it still felt. Meanwhile, Alinea wandered the perimeter of the ruins, scattering seeds and powders, muttering under her breath in a language the birds seemed to understand. The fire inside the temple stayed lit, but low, as though it too sensed the shift. Later, they met again under the archway, where the sun cut sharp lines through the stones. She offered him a wooden bowl filled with figs and rosemary, drizzled in wild honey. "You should eat," she said. "You'll need strength." "For what?" "For the decision you already made." He frowned. "I haven't decided anything." She tilted her head. "That's not what your voice says." He sat beside her, tore a fig in half. "So what now?" "They'll come," she said. "If not tomorrow, then soon. You'll have to choose before they arrive. I could run with you. They'd chase us. I could fight them. They'd send more. I could hide you." "You can't hide fire," she said softly. "It leaves a trail. In the annals of certain night orders, particularly those who hunted heretics, there were stories of silent resistors, soldiers who would intentionally botch missions, claiming false kills, planting evidence, hoping to buy time. Most were caught. Some weren't. But all were haunted by what they spared. Historians still argue, Alinea murmured, watching a bee drink from a blossom, whether those knights were cowards, or if they were the only ones who saw clearly. Kaldus looked down at his hands. "I'm not sure I know what loyalty means anymore." "You do," she said. "You just don't like where it points." The fire behind them crackled suddenly, sharp, urgent. They both turned. The flames danced higher, flickering in deliberate shapes. Not quite words, but not random either. A language forming, waiting. Alinea stepped forward. "It's calling a truth trial." Kaldus stiffened. "A what?" "It means the fire demands to know what you carry." She looked back at him. "It does this when it senses conflict, secrets, a choice still unspoken. And what happens if I refuse?" "It dims," she said. "It forgets you." He stared at the flame. "I don't think I can live without hearing it again." "Then speak." He stepped forward slowly, heart pounding. The fire leaned toward him. He cleared his throat, not out of fear, but reverence. "My name is Kaldus, Ashmere," he said. "I was sent to kill this voice." The fire didn't move. But I didn't, he continued, because I listened, and what I heard, he faltered, looked at Alenia, she nodded. He looked back at the flame. What I heard wasn't rebellion, or danger. It was remembrance, and it spoke to something I thought I'd buried. The fire sparked once. He took a breath. I don't know what I am now, soldier, traitor, witness, coward. But I know this. If I silence her, I silence myself. The fire burst upward just for a moment, then settled. Alenia smiled. It hears you. He collapsed to his knees, drained. The bowl of figs fell, spilling into the dirt. She knelt beside him. You spoke your truth. And now you burn for it. They stayed like that as the sun dipped low, casting long shadows across the temple's ruined walls. By nightfall, the falcon was gone, but something far more dangerous was already on its way. Caldus sharpened his blade by firelight, but his heart wasn't in it. The grindstone hissed and sparked, iron kissing stone with a rhythm that once meant clarity, purpose. Now, it just sounded like hesitation in disguise. Alenia sat across from him, legs folded beneath her, gently threading a length of crimson cord through her fingers. She wasn't watching him, not really. Her eyes tracked the fire's rhythm, syncing with it, like she was listening to something deeper than the room. Who do you think they'll send? She asked softly. Caldus didn't look up. Someone who trained with me, someone who won't hesitate. So, the opposite of you. He gave her a look. Harsh, she smirked. Honest. They sat in silence for a while, her weaving the cord into something he didn't recognize, him pretending to prepare for a battle he no longer believed in. What's that for? He finally asked, nodding toward her hands. A voice band, she said. A kind of tether, old flamekeeper custom, worn on the wrist by those who've chosen to remember instead of obey. You think it'll protect me? No, she said. It'll remind you what protection feels like. She handed it to him. The crimson band was rough, warm to the touch. He tied it around his left wrist, just below the bracer scar he never talked about. Looks good on you, she said. Better than chainmail. Much. He stared into the fire, now calm and steady. Do you think I'll survive this? Alenia paused. Maybe, but survival's not the question anymore. He looked at her, brow furrowed. She leaned in slightly. You've already chosen what to live for. That's rarer than walking away with breath in your lungs. The fire shifted, again, not violently, just enough to signal that something was listening. Outside, the wind changed. It always started like that. A shift in the air. A silence that wasn't natural. The forest stilled. No birds. No insects. Not even leaves moving. Caldus stood, sword in hand, every muscle in his body remembering what it meant to be a weapon. Alenia didn't move. They're close. How do you know? Because the fire just lowered its voice. They didn't speak after that. No time. Caldus moved to the temple's threshold, blade unsheathed. The sword felt heavier than it used to. Maybe it wasn't the steel. Maybe it wasn't the steel. Maybe it was the intention. Footsteps. Crunching leaves. Approaching. Slow, deliberate. One figure emerged first. Tall, armor polished. A red sash across his chest. Captain Vane, Caldus's old sparring partner. Behind him, two more soldiers, faces he didn't recognize, but stances he knew too well. Silent, efficient, already calculating the soft points of the ruin. Caldus, Vane said, voice mild. You're a hard man to find. Not really, Caldus replied. You just had to follow the warmth. Vane smiled faintly. Still got that mouth. I figured you'd gone soft, living in ruins, eating herbs, listening to witches. Caldus didn't rise to it. You got my reply, I assume. Vane's smile disappeared. The falcon returned without a report. That told us enough. And now we're here to clean up what you couldn't. Behind him, the two soldiers drew their blades. Efficient, no threats, no hesitation. Vane didn't move. Last chance, Cal. Walk away. We say she died. We let the story rot with the ruins. You get your rank back, your record polished. And what does she get? A quiet end. The fire behind Caldus flared, softly, but purposefully. He stepped forward. She's not the danger, he said. You are. All of us are. For thinking voices like hers need to be buried. Vane exhaled. I didn't come here to argue philosophy. No, Caldus said. You came to silence memory. Without warning, one of the soldiers lunged. Caldus met him head-on, sword to sword, steel sparking in the air. The clash rang through the temple ruins like a bell with no church. They moved quickly, brutally. Caldus parried, sidestepped, struck. The soldier staggered, wounded, not dead, just disarmed. The second attacker hesitated. That moment of pause changed everything. The fire surged, not outward, not destructively, but like a breath held too long, suddenly exhaled. Alinia's voice filled the air, not words, not even melody, but resonance, deep, vibrating, undeniable. A hum that felt like the floor shifting beneath their feet. The remaining soldiers fell back, stunned. Even Vane hesitated. She sings, Cal, he said, eyes wide. She really sings. You finally hear it, Caldus said. Now listen. Vane took a step forward. If I go back empty-handed, then don't go back, Caldus said. Stay, hear more, or go. Carry the truth with you, but don't raise that blade again. The fire flickered. Vane looked between Caldus and Alinia. Then slowly he sheathed his weapon. I'll say the place was empty, he said. Nothing but ash, nothing to silence. He turned, his men followed, bloodied but alive. As their footsteps faded into the woods, Caldus exhaled for the first time in what felt like hours. Alinia stepped beside him, her voice soft again. You didn't kill them. I didn't need to. You remembered. He looked at the crimson band on his wrist. I did. In some lost traditions there was a belief that memory, not blood, made a warrior sacred, that to remember truthfully was the highest form of honor, greater than victory, louder than conquest. Historians still argue, Alinia said quietly, whether that belief ever made it past the first flame. Caldus smiled. It made it to me. Rain returned the next morning, soft and silver, threading down the mossy walls of the ruined temple like forgiving fingers. The air smelled cleaner, quieter, no soldiers, no steel, just the rhythmic drip of water from the eaves and the low hum of embers breathing in contentment. Caldus didn't wake in panic. He woke slowly, peacefully, eyes blinking open to a world where he hadn't failed. Alinia was sitting beside the hearth, grinding herbs with the pestle again, her sleeves rolled and hair pinned loosely above her neck. Her voice was silent, but the room still felt full, charged with something invisible and kind. You snore, she said, without looking up. Caldus groaned. You're imagining that. The fire tried to smother you once. Fair. He sat up, rubbing sleep from his eyes. His body ached in strange places where armor used to press, where fear used to hide. But it wasn't the ache of battle, it was the ache of being real. Alinia looked at him, really looked. You did more than spare them, you know. He frowned. What do you mean? You let the fire witness them, she said, and it never forgets. She rose, motioning for him to follow. Come, I want to show you something. They walked through the wet garden, past the memory tablets and the offerings. The mist was thinner now, burned off in places by early light. The forest no longer held its breath, it exhaled. She led him down a narrow stone path half swallowed by grass and roots. At the end of the trail, there stood a broken wall, carved with hundreds of names, some still legible, some worn away. What is this? He asked. The Book of Voices, she replied. A memorial. Every flamekeeper who ever lived is here. Not just the ones who survived, the ones who spoke, even once. She traced her finger along one of the names. I come here when the silence gets too loud. Caldus felt humbled, almost too much to speak. My name doesn't belong here. No, she said. Not yet. He raised an eyebrow. Not comforting. You're not a flamekeeper, she added. But you carried a voice. You let it live. He touched the edge of the stone. If this is their book, what happens when no one remembers to read it? She smiled. The fire reads it. They sat there, side by side on the damp stone ledge, watching the names disappear into lichen and time. Neither spoke for a while. No need. Finally Caldus asked, what happens now? You've been changed, Alinia said. You've carried fire. You've heard it. You've spoken in its tongue. But I still don't know it. Not like you. "You're not meant to," she replied. The fire never wanted to be understood. It wanted to be felt. They returned to the temple as the rain faded into mist again. The fire inside was crackling with new energy, dancing high despite the dampness. It was warmer today, warmer in a way that wasn't just temperature. Alinea opened a worn leather scroll case and handed it to him. "What's this?" he asked. "Your next choice," she said. Inside were a dozen parchment slips, each bearing a symbol drawn in soot and wax. Not full words, just fragments. Phonemes. Half memories. "These are voices that never finished speaking," she said. "Their stories cut short. I've been saving them." "The fire says they're ready." Caldus ran his fingers over the parchments. Each one buzzed faintly beneath his skin. "I don't know what to do with them. You'll figure it out. What if I get it wrong?" "You will," she said. "That's how you'll know you're doing it right." He stared into the fire. "I thought this would end," he said quietly. "The mission, the threat, the fear. I thought there would be a moment when I'd know it was over." "It doesn't end," she said, "because voice never ends. You're just part of the song now. In ancient oral cultures, stories weren't considered finished until someone new told them. It wasn't repetition. It was renewal. A tale only truly died when it was no longer reshaped. Historians still argue," Alinea said softly, "whether we invented fire or whether it found us because we could carry its story." Caldus placed the parchments near the flame, watching them catch, not in destruction, but in transformation. They burned silently, and the fire shimmered with tiny musical tones like bells heard underwater. He turned to her. "I won't leave." She met his eyes. "I didn't ask you to. I mean, not ever. Not truly. I know." He sat beside her, watching the flames consume history and give it back as warmth. "I still remember the sound of her voice," he said. "The healer, my first love. I couldn't save her." "You didn't have to," Alinea replied. "You remembered her. That's enough. That's everything." They didn't touch. They didn't need to. But the space between them glowed, quiet, steady, alive, and the fire listened. By the end of the week, the moss on the temple stones had begun to dry. The sun had returned, shy but warming, and with it came birdsong, louder now, braver. A woodpecker tapped near the edge of the forest, and a pair of fox-kits wrestled in the tall grass beyond the old garden. Life, unhurried and unconcerned with politics, stretched and yawned back into motion. Inside the ruin, Caldus stood beneath the ember arch. He hadn't even noticed it when he first arrived. It looked like just another crumbling stone curve, overgrown and moss-furred like everything else. But Alinea had called it sacred. "Here," she said, "standing on the other side, is where the old vows were made." Vows. Before the Flamekeeper orders fell, before temples burned and voices were feared. He raised an eyebrow. "You mean marriage vows?" She smiled faintly. "Not like that. The ember arch wasn't for lovers. It was for those who chose the flame together. Keeper and witness, voice and vessel. It's not about romance. And yet," he said, stepping under it with a smirk, "we're standing under it. Don't get ideas." Too late. Her expression softened, but she didn't look away. The breeze danced through her hair, tugging at the ends like a curious spirit. "I've been thinking," he said. "Dangerous." "I know." He shifted his weight, suddenly unsure. Back in the city there was this musician, street player, used to perform in the shadow of the palace gates. We all ignored him, but one night, after a long patrol, I heard him play, and for just a moment I forgot what my armor weighed. She tilted her head, and I want to do that. But, with your songs. Alinea didn't respond at first. She simply walked toward him, slow and deliberate, stopping inches away. The firelight framed her face in golden edges. "You want to carry my voice," she said. "Not a question," he nodded. "That's a sacred choice. I know it won't make you rich or safe. I know it may get you killed." He didn't hesitate. "I still burn for it." She exhaled. "Then you're not a soldier anymore." He stepped forward, placing his palm on the archer's side. "No, I'm something else. In medieval times, particularly among certain Eastern mystic sects. There were ceremonies where a devotee would vow to carry the wisdom of a spiritual guide, not in books or prayers, but by embodying their memory. These people became living testaments, wandering keepers of someone else's truth. Historians still argue, Alinya said quietly, whether those followers were revered or simply forgotten ghosts with borrowed names. Caldas reached for her hand, not out of desire, but promise. She let him. Under the ember arch, no words were needed, no bells, no crowds, no vows, just two voices, one that had sung, and one that had listened. And now, both belonged to the fire. That evening, they packed a satchel with scrolls, herbs, and a single vial of fire-captured oil. Alinya insisted he carry it close to his chest. Not for light, she said, for memory. They stood together at the edge of the path, looking down into the wide forest beyond. Where will you go first? She asked. West, he said, where the war was loudest. They've forgotten how to listen. She touched his cheek briefly. They'll try to shut you out. I know, they'll think you're mad. He smirked. I probably am. You are, she agreed, but the good kind. The fire inside the ruin flickered once, then settled. It didn't resist his leaving. You'll come back? She asked. When the world forgets your voice again, he said, I'll bring it home. She didn't cry, neither did he. But when he vanished into the trees, she sang, for the first time in full voice, no humming, no restraint. And though he was already too far to hear it, the fire carried the melody to him anyway. He stopped in the clearing, tilted his head, and smiled. It wasn't goodbye, it was go on. Caldas had never known silence could be so loud. The first village he reached after leaving the Ember Temple was nestled in a narrow valley between fog-drenched hills. It was a quiet place, not from peace, but from fear. Doors shut too early. Children played without laughter. The tavern had no music, only the clink of mugs, and the occasional low grunt of a tired man trying not to remember something. He didn't wear his armor, only a cloak. The crimson thread Alinya gave him stayed wrapped around his wrist, hidden under a fraying cuff. Her fire oil vial hung around his neck on a leather cord, heavy like a heartbeat. He sat near the well in the center of town and began to hum. At first, no one noticed, but then an older woman, grey-haired and crooked like an old branch, paused in her walk. She tilted her head. That song, she said. He didn't stop humming, just gave a small nod. My grandmother sang that, she murmured, but she said it wasn't hers, that she found it. Caldas smiled. She didn't find it, it found her. By the time dusk painted the valley in blue and gold, 3 others had gathered, drawn not by volume, but familiarity. Caldas didn't speak much. He let the fire's memory do the talking, hummed, murmured, let certain syllables slide out of his mouth the way Alinya had taught him. True, warm, honest. He left before dawn. No fanfare, no coins, just the quiet knowledge that someone in that town now remembered the voice. He did the same in 2 more villages, then a monastery, then a battlefield turned burial site, where he whispered one of the old fire-tongue phrases, Valnaith, and placed a dried forget-me-not in the soil. He started collecting fragments too, phrases half-remembered by elders, songs hummed in corners of taverns where war-worn men forgot themselves. He'd scribble these into his journal at night, often near a campfire, letting the flames hear each word before he dared write it. One night, by a riverbank near the ruined bridge of Orwin's Crossing, he dared something else. He spoke a full sentence in fire tongue. Navelka Torvelin, the wind stilled. The fire at his side lifted, not with heat but weightless motion, like it was reaching upward to listen. The phrase had just come to him. No rehearsal, no meaning assigned. Later, flipping through Alinya's parchments, he found the symbol etched faintly beside a note in her hand. To call fire without pain, speak this when your hands are clean and your purpose carries no blade. He hadn't even known what he was saying, but he'd said it right. In medieval grimoires, particularly those passed secretly through monastic circles, there were often warnings about unknowing invocation. Saying a sacred word with no knowledge of its weight was considered dangerous, not because it brought punishment, but because it might call something that misunderstood your intention. Historians still argue, Caldus muttered to himself, warming his hands by the flame, whether knowledge or ignorance was the true power of the old tongues. That night, he didn't dream. Instead, the fire whispered names, not aloud, not even in words, just impressions, faces, feelings, stories. One of them was Vane. He saw his former comrade, now demoted, wandering border camps, telling anyone who would listen about a flamekeeper who could bend reality. Most laughed. Some leaned in. None knew that Vane's real purpose wasn't spreading fear, it was planting seeds. Calder smiled, one voice at a time. Weeks passed. Eventually the songs started returning to him, not ones he'd carried, but ones he had inspired. A girl in a market stall singing a fragment he'd hummed in a tavern. 3 towns back, a farmer carving a spiral into his gatepost. A fire dancing just slightly to a rhythm that shouldn't exist. Then, one day, in a town called Merrill's Hollow, he heard her voice. Not from a fire, not from memory, from a boy, a shepherd child, maybe 10 years old, sang a lullaby near a dying campfire. Caldus froze. The melody, the rise and fall, it was hers. "How do you know that song?" Caldus asked gently. The boy shrugged. "I don't, just heard it." "From who?" The boy looked confused. "No one. The fire, maybe." Caldus knelt by the hearth and whispered, "She's still speaking." And the fire leaned forward, just a little, as if nodding. He stayed in that town for 3 days. Taught the children to hum the melody correctly. Taught one of the elders how to draw the ember spiral into clay. And on the morning he left, a little girl gave him a red string she'd braided herself. For remembering, she said. He tied it beside Alinia's voice band. Now, when he walked, the 2 threads flicked in the wind like twin flames, one from where he began, and one from what he'd ignited. And somewhere deep in his chest, a memory stirred. Not sorrow, not pride, just fire. The scrolls had warned him, fire remembers too much. Caldus learned this the hard way when he reached the ruins of Krelborn, a town reduced to stone skeletons and twisted iron. No one had lived there in over a decade. The war had passed through like a tidal wave, fast, brutal, and careless. Ash still clung to the corners of collapsed buildings. Trees had grown up through old cobblestones. The wind here didn't whistle, it moaned. He hadn't planned to stop, just pass through. But the fire in his travel lantern began to flicker oddly, twitching against the glass, as if drawn to something. So he followed it. At the center of what used to be the marketplace stood a cracked fountain, dry and half swallowed by ivy. Around it, scorched earth formed a perfect circle. At its center, a blackened post jutted from the stone like a broken bone. It was a pyre, or had been. Caldus crouched and touched the stone, warm, still. And then he heard it. A whisper. Not in his head, not imagination, real, a word, not spoken. Felinara. He'd never heard it before. But he knew it. He repeated it softly. The fire in his lantern flared so brightly it shattered the glass. He jerked back, shielding his face. The flames didn't leap. They stood like a pillar of memory. Inside them, for one fleeting second, he saw her, not Alinia, but another woman, pale hair, young, terrified, standing against a crowd with a straight back and a trembling voice. She had died here, and the fire had never forgotten. Calder stepped back, heart racing. "I don't want to see more," he said aloud. The fire didn't care. It pulsed again, and another image bloomed, this time of a man in soldier's armor. Not him, not anyone he knew. He was shouting. The voice echoed. A word, a command, and then flame. All of it, everything, gone. Caldus dropped to his knees. "I get it," he whispered. "I hear it. I hear her." The fire died back down. Just embers now. He stayed like that for hours, shaking, not from fear, from weight. Later, as dusk settled like a shawl, he built a small hearth beside the fountain, using bits of fallen brick and charred timber. He sat before it and lit the flame, carefully, respectfully. Then he spoke. He didn't sing, didn't chant, just spoke. She was a voice. He wasn't sure who he was talking about anymore. Alinia, the woman in the flame, the healer. He failed. Maybe all of them. She wasn't power. She wasn't threat. She was reminder. The flame nodded. almost imperceptibly. He pulled a piece of parchment from his satchel and began to write. Not a poem, not even a memory, just a list. Names, impressions, phrases people had told him along the way. He wrote until the ink ran out. Then he burned the page. The fire consumed it in silence. In medieval lore, fire was not always for warmth. In some cultures, it was a courtroom, a confessor. People whispered secrets into flames, hoping they'd be judged, and either forgiven or erased. There are stories of priests hearing replies in smoke. Most were deemed mad. Historians still argue. Caldus muttered to himself, watching the ash drift skyward, whether those flames judged or just listened. He stayed overnight at the ruins. That evening, he dreamed not of war, but of voices, whispering, overlapping, echoing. A chorus of songs cut short. He didn't try to silence them, he just listened. And when he awoke, the earth smelled less like ash and more like something new. A bud, a root, a chance. He gathered what remained of the broken lantern, wrapped it in cloth, and buried it beneath the hearth. Let the next flame remember better, he whispered. He continued west. At the next village, they didn't open their doors to him. He waited anyway, sat in the square, hummed a low tune. By nightfall, an old man brought him bread, didn't ask for anything, just nodded and left it beside him. The voice was spreading, not in banners, not in firestorms, in memory. And Caldus, he no longer needed to prove anything. He wasn't a messenger, he was the message. A soldier turned echo, a blade made witness. He dreamed again that night of Alinia, not as she had been, but older, wearing a robe of soot and silk, standing in the temple's hollow arch. She didn't speak, she sang, and he knew every word. Caldus had walked through so many towns by now that he stopped counting. His boots were cracked, his cloak was more thread than cloth, his sword, still strapped to his back, hadn't been drawn in weeks, not from fear, from choice. It was evening when he reached the village of Nareth's Hollow, a place not on most maps, known mostly for its barley mead and its quiet refusal to get involved in outside matters. The kind of place where even wars passed around the edges, not through the middle, and yet, here too, the fire had whispered to him. The first thing he noticed was the silence, not dead, like Krellborn, but hollow. The people here moved like shadows, polite nods, avoided gazes. The tavern was full, but the music had been replaced by low muttering and the occasional cough. He sat down at the far end, next to the hearth. It was unlit in a tavern known for fire-roasted bread and hot stew, unlit during a damp spring evening, unlit by design. He felt it instantly, the weight of something missing. "Why is the fire cold?" he asked the barkeep, an older woman with sharp eyes and a tired mouth. She didn't answer right away, just glanced at the stone hearth. "It won't light," she finally muttered. "Not since the girl vanished." Caldus raised an eyebrow. "What girl?" "Marna," she said. A local, young, sang to herself. "Used to light this hearth every morning. Even the town bellfire. Said she learned it from a traveller." He felt a jolt in his chest. "She had this tune," the woman added. "Hummed it everywhere. Gave folks shivers. Beautiful, though. We all said she was special." Then one day, she walked into the forest, and didn't come back. That night, Caldus visited the hearth alone. The bar had emptied out. Rain tickled the roof. He crouched and touched the stone, still warm, still listening. He hummed Alinia's melody, the one he had carried from the Ember Temple, the one that had once soothed him to sleep, beside a woman whose voice could bend memory. The flame caught immediately. It exploded to life, not violently but joyfully, like a dog rushing to greet a long-lost master. The barkeep gasped from the doorway. He turned to her. The fire didn't forget her. She clutched her apron. "That song, you know it. She gave it to me," he said, "and I gave it to her." Caldus stayed in the village for 3 days. The townspeople didn't ask questions. They listened. They lit candles without touching them. Children played with shadows and found voices in the echoes. Someone, he didn't see who, etched the ember spiral into the tavern's lintel. On the 4th morning, he walked to the forest edge where Marna had last been seen, and he found it. A circle of stones, a single thread of red tied to a tree branch. and a pile of burned petals, forget-me-nots. No body, no sign of struggle, but in the air, a note, high, clear, fading. Caldas dropped to one knee and placed his hand on the ground. "You found her, didn't you?" he whispered to the fire. It didn't flare, it didn't warm, but it answered. Inside his chest, the same fire that had once responded to his clumsy fire tongue, now pulsed with a quiet certainty. Marna hadn't died, not truly. She had become part of the fire, and now it sang her in return. In ancient Celtic folklore, there was a belief in soul keepers, people who vanished into sacred woods and returned not as bodies, but as voices that could be heard only near firelight or mist. They weren't mourned, they were remembered in song. Historians still argue, Caldas murmured, whether those voices were ghosts or just stories too stubborn to fade. He returned to the tavern that night and sang, not with perfection, but with truth. He sang her song, layered atop Alinia's. The people joined. They didn't know the words, but they knew the feeling. Their voices braided together like smoke. The fire burned higher than it had in years, and when he finally stood to leave, a small boy followed him to the door, holding something tightly wrapped in cloth. "What's this?" Caldas asked. "A voice," the boy said shyly. "I heard it last night. It came back to me this morning." Inside the cloth was a rough drawing, a spiral with wings. "I'll keep it safe," Caldas promised. The boy nodded. "Good. Voices get lonely." He left before sunrise. With each town, Caldas noticed something. He was no longer the only one humming. Others had started to carry the tune, and not his version. Theirs. Fragments changed, lyrics altered, but the essence, still there. Alinia's voice, Marna's fire, his own regrets. A song built by echoes. He was no longer alone in remembering, and that, he realized, was the point all along. The fire trial took place beneath a sky that couldn't decide whether to storm or sleep. Caldas had wandered far north, past the reaches of maps that named places, into a region locals called the Grey Verge. Forests here whispered in tones lower than the wind, and the rivers ran black from mineral veins, not shadow. He hadn't meant to find the trial. It found him. It began with a whisper, Alinia's voice, though not in memory, in invitation, a dream, clear as flame. "You've walked far, but not full. Come, one truth remains." He woke in a cold field, fireless but sweating. His crimson wristband glowed faintly in the moonlight. So he followed the whisper, through thorns, past stone rings, up into the high fogs where only the most stubborn moss grew. And there, at the summit of a hill ringed by dead trees, was a circle of scorched stone, unlit, but waiting. He stepped into it. The wind died instantly, and then the fire rose, not from the ground, not from wood, but from within. The air caught light like paper. A wall of slow-moving flame surrounded him in a perfect ring, silent and alive. Then came the voice. Not Alinia, not his, not anyone he'd heard. Male and female, old and young, layered. Caldas Ashmere. "You carry memory that is not yours." He stood tall. "I was given it freely. Do you understand what it means to speak it?" "Yes." "Do you believe it?" He paused. "I do now." "Then the fire will see." The world fell away. Suddenly he stood not in the ring, but in a city of glass and soot. His sword was in his hand, and before him, men, women, children, running, smoke above them. He recognized it. Redmore, the massacre. Only this time, he was the fire. The flames crawled up buildings, and every step he took caused them to spread. His voice, his actual voice, shouted orders. Soldiers obeyed. Doors broke. Screams. He covered his ears. This isn't what happened, but a different voice echoed in response. It's what might have. It's what nearly did. The vision shifted. Now he was in the Ember Temple. Only it wasn't ruined. It stood tall, golden-roofed, full of light, and at the center, on a raised platform, was Alinia, chained, burned, silenced. A crowd of soldiers clapped as flames swallowed her. He reached for her. Couldn't move. "This is what your silence might have done." He dropped to his knees. "Do you still carry her voice?" the fire asked. "Yes," he gasped. "Do you burn for it?" "Yes." "Then speak." Culdus stood, body shaking, and shouted, not with command, but truth. Her voice is not gone. I carry it still. I sing it. I remember it, and I will never let it die. The vision shattered, the fire dimmed, and he stood once again, in the real circle of scorched stone, alone, until he turned. And Alinia stood there, not a ghost, not a memory, her as she was, hair braided back, cloak embroidered with the spiral, only she didn't speak. Her mouth opened. Nothing came out. He stepped toward her. Alinia? She smiled, tilted her head, and then pointed to him. She raised her finger, touching his chest, then vanished. Not into smoke, into flame. He staggered back, stared down at the mark she'd left. Where her finger had touched, a small ember spiral now glowed, inkless, burned not into skin, but soul. He fell to the ground. When he woke, the ring of flame was gone, but he remembered every word. The fire trial was complete. In 14th century mysticism, particularly among the wandering orders of the flame scholars, there was said to be a final test. The trial of voice and smoke. Survivors returned with no wounds, no tokens, only silence, or a new tongue. Historians still argue, Culdus murmured the next night by firelight, whether those who passed the trial spoke for the fire, or if they became something it could no longer silence. He understood now. Alinia hadn't died. She had given him everything. Her voice, her burden, her truth. And now, it burned in him. He no longer dreamed of memory. He was memory, and the world would never forget her again. The valley of Vadran was burning when Culdus arrived. Not with fire, at least, not the kind he carried, but with fear. A sickness had swept through the southern farms, and people were dying, not from wounds but from silence. No one spoke of it. No one sang. No bells rang. No prayers echoed from the stone chapel perched on the hill. He'd passed the sickened on the road, hollow-eyed, wrapped in blankets, clinging to herbs that had no healing left in them. Their coughs weren't wet or ragged. They were empty, as if something inside had already stopped trying. When he stepped into the chapel, the priest didn't look up. "We're closed," the old man muttered, polishing an unlit candle holder. Culdus walked straight to the hearth, still warm, but the flame was gone. "You tried to keep it lit," he said. The priest flinched. "How would you know that?" "Because the fire's still listening." That made the man look up. "I've heard your name," the priest said. "The singing soldier, the man who carries voices. Is it true?" Culdus didn't answer. He simply untied the leather pouch from around his neck and opened it. Inside, a pinch of Alinia's ember ash, a fragment of Marna's drawing, a scrap of parchment from a village child's fire chant, and a vial filled with fire oil that shimmered gold even in the dimness. He poured 2 drops into the hearth. Then he began to hum, not loud, not commanding, just true. The fire caught, slow and reluctant at first, then rising with a deep exhale. A curl of heat brushed Culdus's cheek like a hand remembering a face. The priest dropped to his knees, not in worship, in relief. Outside, something shifted. A cry, not of pain, but of recognition. Then another. And then, laughter. Laughter. Culdus walked into the square and began to speak, not to preach, to remind. He told them about Alinia, about the temple, about the song that changed him, and the truth that couldn't be killed. People gathered. Some sat, some wept, a few sang, and by dusk, the fire in the chapel wasn't the only one burning. There were cook fires again, hearths relit, songs hummed. They were remembering. Later that night, he sat under the old bell tree behind the chapel and pulled out a piece of parchment. The stars were out, indifferent and beautiful. His fingers trembled slightly. This time, he was writing not for the fire, but for someone who might come after. He wrote the truth. Not poetry, not performance. He wrote, "I was sent to silence her. Instead, I carry her. The fire is not destruction, it is memory made loud, and it waits for anyone who dares to speak without fear." He signed it, not as Culdus Ashmere, soldier of the Empire, but simply voice keeper, and he added a spiral beside it. In medieval monastic scriptoria, there are records of anonymous scrolls found tucked between holy books. Messages from the burned voices. Some were warnings, some were songs, none were signed. Historians still argue, Caldus whispered, eyes on the fire, whether they were madmen or messengers. The next morning, he handed the letter to the priest. Hide it, he said, somewhere no one will find it until they need to. The priest nodded, reverent. What should I call it? Caldus smiled. Call it a beginning. He left before midday. No applause, no parade. But as he crested the hill, he heard it. A child's voice, singing her melody. Wrong notes too fast, but honest. He laughed aloud, a sound even he didn't recognize at first. His shoulders, once taut with duty, now felt light. He wasn't running from silence anymore. He was spreading flame. He slept that night in a field, beneath a sky clear as glass. The fire beside him pulsed, not with heat, but with memory. And for the first time, when he closed his eyes, he didn't dream of the past. He dreamed of her, standing not in ruin, but in a garden of fire and flowers. She was smiling, and behind her, hundreds of voices, each one singing a different version of the same truth. The voice was alive, because he burned for it. The next letter was already waiting for him. He found it nestled inside the hollow of a cypress tree, wrapped in birch bark and sealed with a wax imprint he hadn't seen in months. A simple spiral, no flame, no emblem of war or empire, just a mark. Familiar, intimate. He broke the seal with shaking fingers. Caldus, I have given you my voice, but I never told you what it costs. Memory burns slowly. Sometimes it becomes a burden too heavy for one heart. If you're reading this, the fire has called you to the place of still flame. You know the path. You've seen it before, though only in dreams. Come soon. My silence grows louder. Or, he folded the bark, tucked it into his cloak, and didn't stop moving. 3 days of travel, no towns, no roads, only half-remembered images, twisting trees, stone cairns, and the scent of fire somewhere just ahead. He reached the place of still flame, on the 4th dawn. It was not a ruin, it was not a temple, it was a single stone hearth in the middle of a flat field of glass. Black glass, melted, hardened, ancient, no smoke, no ash, no sound, but the fire was still there. Caldus knelt beside it, hands trembling. He didn't speak right away, just listened. And then, from behind the hearth, a figure stepped forward, Ilinia, but changed, not older, not younger, more like someone caught between. She did not speak, because she couldn't. The fire had taken her voice. Caldus felt it instantly, like a string inside him pulling taut. He stood slowly, walked to her. Stopped when he was close enough to see that her eyes no longer reflected the fire. They held it. She opened her mouth. No sound, just heat. She touched his chest again, right over his heart, and he understood. The fire had not silenced her. It had entered her. She had become the final ember, living flame sealed in flesh, and it needed to move on. He whispered, "You want to pass it?" She nodded. He whispered again, "To me?" Another nod. His throat closed. "I don't know if I'm strong enough." Her gaze answered, "You already are." In ancient Sumerian myth, there is the legend of the Lamasi, spirits who carry divine words across generations, never speaking aloud, but embedding truth in action. They were said to burn from the inside, always walking toward the next listener. Historians still argue, Caldus murmured, whether those spirits were guardians or burdens passed too often. She took his hand, placed it to her lips, and breathed. It wasn't air, it was flame. It didn't burn, it settled, inside him, in his lungs, in his veins, in his voice, and then she was gone, not into ash, into him. He fell back, gasping. The sky above shimmered for a second, just long enough to show the faintest spiral of smoke climbing into the wind. The fire in the hearth flared once, then went out, but the warmth remained in his chest. Caldus stood, shakily. He didn't weep. He sang, one note, then another. It wasn't her song anymore. It was theirs, blended, new. He left the field by nightfall, not as a soldier, not even as a carrier of someone else's memory. He had become a voice keeper in full, the last and the first. The fire no longer needed temples. It had him. Words spread like smoke. First whispers in alleyways of a man whose voice made candles flicker, who sang in languages older than kings. Then songs resurfacing in villages untouched by fire in decades. Old women remembered melodies they swore they'd forgotten. Children hummed them without ever being taught. In city courts, officials mocked tales of the singing soldier, but the people kept listening, and fires stayed lit. Caldus moved through these lands quietly. He no longer lingered in taverns or town squares. He no longer explained who he was or where the songs had come from. He didn't need to. The fire did that for him now. He became part of a rhythm he didn't control. One night, on the outskirts of a hilltop village called Ellenfold, he arrived to find a gathering already waiting. Not just farmers or elders, but traveling singers, hedge priests, even a few wandering knights. They were sitting around a great bonfire, singing Alinya's melody, but wrong. The tune was almost too fast. The lyrics jumbled. Someone had added a line about birds. He smiled, because it still worked. He stepped into the firelight, and one voice stopped mid-verse. A woman squinted at him. "You're him, aren't you?" Caldus lifted his head, shadows curling beneath his eyes. "I'm no one," he said, "but I remember someone." And then he sang, not to correct them, to join them. Their melody and his wove together like rivers converging. The fire danced higher. Sparks rose like stars. People swayed. Some cried. Some simply breathed differently, like their lungs had forgotten how to hold air until this very moment. And above them, the fire listened. It always listened. After the song faded, someone handed him a jug of honey wine. Another offered a flower. A child gave him a pebble, with a spiral scratched into it. He accepted them all, not as offerings, as echoes. He slept near the embers that night, head resting on his travel pack. The fire beside him was small, but bright. He spoke to it, not in words but in memory, not to summon, just to remind. In some cultures, it was believed that the fire would leave you if you ever forgot your first warmth, that it wasn't loyalty, but remembrance, that kept the flame at your side. Historians still argue, Caldus whispered to the stars, whether fire is a force of nature or just the last thing willing to forgive us. In the days that followed, he wrote less and sang more. His journal pages remained blank, but the people carried his words for him. One town carved his verses into bread loaves, another inscribed spirals into their roof tiles. A coastal village sang his song into the ocean, trusting the waves would carry it further, and always he moved forward, never lingering long. Not because he feared being found, but because he wasn't the flame, he was the spark. The night he reached the stone border wall of the old empire, the sky was black, clear, and glittering. He stood before the last outpost, abandoned now. Nature had taken it back. Ivy clung to watchtowers. The gates had rusted into stillness. He didn't cross through. He sang to it. A lullaby, the same one Alinya had hummed beside the hearth that first night. And when the final note faded, the wind blew warm through the broken gate, as if the fire within the stones had finally been heard. He slept beneath that gate, dreaming not of ruins or songs or even of her, but of silence. Not the hollow kind, the peaceful kind, the kind that comes after something is fully spoken and before something new begins. He became legend long before he was ready to disappear. Caldus began to notice signs, quiet but unmistakable, that the story was no longer his alone, it was theirs. He heard it whispered in inns, in marketplaces, by shepherds on the road, each telling bent the truth a little further. Some said he was fireborn, that his blood could light wet wood. Others claimed he was a ghost of the war, doomed to sing until the empire fell. One tale, told by a toothless woman near a storm-racked coast, said he had once been a flamekeeper himself, and that the woman in the ruin had only been his reflection. Caldus never corrected them, he simply listened, because now the stories themselves were fire, and stories, when believed, don't need to be accurate, they need to burn. One village invited him to witness their spring kindle festival. He arrived just before dusk, and watched in silence as they lit their bonfire, not with flint, but with a word. A child whispered a phrase in fire tongue. The flame caught. Effortlessly. His eyes stung not from smoke, from remembrance. Another place, A quiet hamlet nestled in a mountain pass had built a temple, small, simple, no gold, no icons, just a single stone hearth kept lit by those who'd sworn to remember the songs. The walls were etched not with doctrine, but lyrics. The fire does not ask who you were, only what remains of you when silence falls. He touched the words with his fingers. Warm. He stayed the night there, alone with the flame, and in that flickering light, he whispered the final truth he had never spoken aloud. I miss her. No fire flared, no wind shifted, but the warmth on his chest grew stronger, right where she had touched him during the fire trial. The ember spiral, invisible to others, pulsed faintly. He closed his eyes. I carry you, he whispered. A week later, he crossed a river and entered a land where no one knew his name, where the empire had no banners, where people didn't believe in flamekeepers or empires or soldiers who sang. And still, he sang, softly at first, then louder, in marketplaces, in groves, beside dying hearths and newborn fires. He taught one phrase to a baker, another to a child, gathering twigs, a chorus to a widow who hadn't spoken since her husband passed. They remembered, because truth, when carried gently, stays. One night, as he walked beneath a starlit sky, a girl passed him on the road. She hummed Alinia's melody, but not his version, her own, and when she noticed him, she smiled but did not stop, just kept walking, confident, bright, already a voice keeper in the making. Calder stood there for a long time after, not with sadness, with completion. This was what the fire had wanted all along, not devotion, not obedience, continuance. He made one final journey back to where it all began, the Ember Temple, or what was left of it. Time had worn away more of the stone, the roof had nearly collapsed. Ivy rained freely now, but the hearth, still warm. He knelt beside it and sang, not to call anyone, not to perform, to remember. And when the last note faded, he whispered, I'm ready. The fire answered, not in words, in feeling. A breeze brushed his cheek, the scent of rosemary and ash. He stood, removed the crimson voiceband from his wrist, laid it gently into the embers, then turned and walked into the forest. He didn't look back, didn't need to, because her voice lived in more than flame now. It lived in him, and it would keep spreading, as long as someone still sang when the fire forgot how. Time is not kind to stories. It stretches them, folds them, sometimes forgets them altogether. But the story of the man who burned for a voice, well, that one stayed warm. Long after Caldus disappeared from maps, people still spoke of him. His name shifted, of course, became Calin, Caldan, the Red Listener, the Ember Walker. In some villages he was a saint, in others, a warning. In the capital, they erased his name from the military rolls, but not from memory, because memory, like fire, finds a way to survive. Decades passed, seasons turned. Children who once hummed his songs grew old, taught them to their children, and those children did the same. The melodies changed, evolved, drifted far from the original, but the feeling never left. One scholar, long after empires fell and new ones rose, discovered a scroll sealed in resin beneath the chapel floor. It held no name, just a simple message. She was a voice. I listened. I carried her long enough that others began to carry me. The scholar didn't understand the language at first. It wasn't any tongue they knew, but when they read it aloud, the hearth behind them flared, only for a moment, but enough to know, somewhere, something had remembered. In a windswept valley, once called Vadran, a weathered stone still stands, no markings but the spiral. Travelers sit by it, and often feel warmer than the fire warrants. Some say they hear humming at night, low and soothing. Others report dreams of a man in a red-threaded cloak, who sings to forgotten flames. And in a forgotten ruin where the Ember Temple once stood, ivy has all but reclaimed the stones. But the hearth, still there, still warm. And sometimes, just sometimes, if the wind is right, and the forest holds its breath, a voice can be heard, not loud, not seeking fame, just singing to the fire, as if reminding it, I still remember her. So now, dear listener, the flame begins to settle. You've walked far tonight, through forests and ruins, memory and melody, with nothing but a voice to guide you, a voice that wasn't trying to command or dazzle, just one that asked simply to be heard. And you did. You listened. Let that sink in for a moment, because not everyone does. Out there, in the quiet corners of the world, there are still fires burning, not for warmth, not for light, but for remembrance, old stories waiting to be stirred, voices waiting for an echo, people who hum alone in the dark, not knowing they are part of a song that began long before them, like Caldus, like Alinia, like you. It's easy to think stories end when the characters walk away or the fire burns down, but they don't. They rest, they breathe, they wait for the next listener to pick them up and whisper them alive again. And that's what you've done tonight. So if your heart feels a little heavier now or strangely lighter, that's the fire settling inside you, not to burn, just to be. Let it stay, let it flicker, let it remind you of what truth sounds like when someone finally dares to carry it. Now, dim the lights if you haven't already. Pull the covers up to your chin, breathe slowly. The fire is low, yes, but it is not out. It sleeps for now, inside you, and it will wake again when someone else listens. Good night.